Yeah, so I'm a Civic Tech Toronto alumni. I was a co-organizer for about 4.3 years. But then sort of as I started my new job in the UK, I sort of pulled away from that because time zones are a thing, and I wasn't willing to stay up until 2 a.m. So now work with the WK design system in London. I am a white male, currently able, though with encroaching sort of sight and hearing loss, and we'll see sort of where that takes me. I'm not here to be an expert today, but sort of the purpose of this presentation is to share some observations and share some sort of learnings that I've had over the last year or so. And as far as like character description, all I will say is that I am wearing a dark blue sweater with bright red and gold on it in sort of a floral pattern. This is new to me. I'm not sure about whether I like it or not yet, but yeah, I'm excited to be wearing it because it's very bright for what I usually wear. And without further ado, I'll get us started, if I know how to. There we go. All right. So as I go through this, I should probably start with the previous slide. Presentations about improving web accessibility, but specifically from the context of being in a government. So the big question I'm sort of hoping to explore today is kind of a bit operational, but when you have such a big organization like a government, and when you have all those people and all those structures working together, how can you work to improve web accessibility? So this isn't something where I've actually gone and do this, but this is more from sort of being in both the UK government now and previously working in the Ontario government, sort of things I've seen as sort of what I would consider like a playbook or a strategy to improve web accessibility at such a large scale like a government. So I've got 7 or 8 different sort of title slides that give like an overall statement, and then a few more slides after that for each of them that explores it more in depth. And all of these, I would encourage people, if they have like a specific question for one of these, I'm going to go pretty quickly. And I've got 4 examples that I'm going to share to sort of give it a bit more of a, yeah, a bit more of what work have I been working on. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to either write them down or take notes to ask later. So the first one I have is accessibility is fundamental. This is sort of the first statement I have here. And the backing up for that, at least in the UK, is that 1 in 5 people have reported having a disability in the UK. So that's sort of an official fact and figure. Other figures that are used within the community, the accessibility sort of government and private communities, is 1 billion people in the world have a disability, and that is expected to increase sort of as populations age. So there is sort of, it's fundamental in the fact that like if you're not designing with accessibility in mind, you're not really designing for like at least 20% of the population, maybe even more. As far as how accessibility is structured, there is sort of this standard one, which I'm happy to borrow. No need to reinvent the wheel. This was worked on by some very smart people across the world, and is part of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines put out by the Web Accessibility Initiative, who is related to the World Wide Web Consortium. So it's all sort of up in that big sort of theory space of the web. So they have 4 sort of principles that they go by. So things should be perceivable. That means that users need to be able to perceive the information. That's not just sight, that's all their senses. The top ones we usually use for the internet right now are like vision, hearing, and touch. Touch, as an example, that would be like a Braille keyboard sort of thing. I don't think we do too much in the space of smell and taste yet, but maybe in the future. The next one is operable. So this basically means that users need to be able to operate the interface. It needs to be any interaction that is supposed to be able to do, everyone should be able to do that. The next one we have is understandable. So this one has to do with like comprehension often, and it means that they need to be able to understand the information that's within sort of the application or website you have, as well as the way to interact with the user interface, how to use it. And the last one is sort of the only able one that's not there. It's robust, not robustible. So this means that it needs to be able to work across a range of technologies, be able to work without breaking every 5 seconds, all that sort of stuff. It needs to be, as the word describes, robust. So that's sort of the fundamentals of accessibility. The next statement I have, feel free to write a comment if you think this is controversial. I don't think it is, which is accessibility is cross-functional. I currently am working as an accessibility specialist in a multidisciplinary team. So I'm sort of like one person with accessibility in the title, but in my view, and from what I've seen, accessibility is a team sport. And that's important when sort of looking at how to improve accessibility across a government. You can't just sort of plop in a few people that have sort of the title of accessibility. It sort of goes across the whole process. So the current theory I have, or the current like quick answer I have, is that there's sort of 4 categories where accessibility sort of reaches across. So there's research. So that's things like user research with disabled people, and also research with people with various lived experiences. On the design side, one of the principles there is you have things like inclusive design as sort of a set of principles, and you also have universal design feeding into accessibility. So it also includes, I added this side note today because I forgot about it. I didn't forget about it, but I should have said it earlier. Design also includes practices like content design and service design. Those are also fundamental to sort of properly implementing accessibility. And then on development, you've got things like progressive enhancement, which I'm currently sort of trying to convince people that that is an accessibility thing. Progressive enhancement often has to do with like the resilience of different technologies on the web and their ability to be used sort of across devices and in ways that sort of the baseline is good. And then if you add styles on that, it's still really good. And then if you add sort of like interactive JavaScript functionality, it's still really good. That's pretty fundamental to accessibility as well. And the last one I have there is testing. So sort of the way that you test different software and different apps, the way that you're sort of testing whether you've actually achieved the goals of your website or app or service, that needs to be sort of a space where accessibility is also looked at. All right, next broad statement I have is accessibility is iterative. So what I mean by that, or sort of different ways to go about that, is that accessibility isn't something where you set aside like 6 months to do it, and then you do it, and then you're done, and you move on. It's something that needs continuous improvement on it. And it's something that if you try to fix everything all at once, you're going to burn out your team. Kind of doesn't matter how many resources or funding you throw at it. It is sort of an evolving field. It takes research, it takes iteration, it takes time. So sort of ways to go across the iterative nature of it are to focus on people. So that means when in doubt, do user research, talk to people, sort of have those conversations, set achievable goals. So don't burn out your entire team by saying, we're going to hit this like perfect accessibility by next week. You're not going to be able to do it if you do that. Always be ready to learn. So it's also iterative in the way that like it is a lot of knowledge. It's a large space. And there's many permutations. It is partially inclusive design where you're looking at all sort of lived experiences, all sort of situations for people. So it's not something that you can sort of sit down, learn once and be done. And the last point I have to help is avoid getting stuck in theory. So there is theory around accessibility, but don't just stay there. Go out and actually put it in practice, do some things, try some things. The more practical you go, that gives you space to learn as well and reach goals. All right, next major statement, accessibility takes governance. So what do I mean by this? There's a few different things that could mean, but basically these are 4 things that I think really help when it comes to doing it at the scale of a government. It's good to have a central authority on accessibility. This doesn't mean that a central group does all accessibility work, but it means if there are disputes about what is considered like accessible or what is compliant with whatever the rules are there are in the government, there is a place to go to sort of set that. There's also something that's really valuable is to have sort of an endorsed set of like training or endorsed set of principles, endorsed sets of guidelines, sort of a place that everyone can go and say, hey, how do I do this? And then there's an answer, or there's an email to call, or a phone number to call, an email to message to get sort of answers on that. Practical instruction beyond legislation is also valuable. Many governments sort of have a compliance requirement where it's like, we have to meet X set of guidelines at X level in order to be considered like legally accessible to avoid like lawsuits and things like that. just telling people they have to do that is not enough to make it a practice. So you need to be able to give instruction in that, tell people how to meet it practically and what they can do sort of on a day-to-day to get there. I think I already said this one, so I'll skip it. Endorse and maintain documentation is very important. And then also, this one has a lot of big words: consolidated effort and distributed testing. I think that means if there are things that are going to be repeatable across multiple spaces, so say you have a bunch of services or transactions in your government, and they're all going to need to use the same things, study it once, get it right once, and then distribute it to other groups across the government who can test it and feedback with feedback for that. Which brings me to the first example. Hey, that sounds like a design system, David. Yes, it does, David. So this is one way to improve accessibility rapidly, sort of within a government, is to have a design system. Essentially is just a repository with a team behind it to support it, that has often code, guidance, and sort of principles on how to build good websites or services, or both. And a design system, the example I've given is the GovUK design system. So this is services across the UK government, and it receives millions of views every month. So if we focus our effort on embedding accessibility into that centralized design system, it won't hit all the accessibility pieces, but it does allow sort of a baseline influence of accessibility to spread out across the entire government. All right, I'm not sure how I am for time. All right, I'm good. So the next broad statement is accessibility takes community. And once again, my rule of 4, apparently, I've got 4 bullet points for this one. So when it takes community, that means not just like an online place where stuff is gathered, that's actual people working together and meeting, communicating, all that sort of stuff. Real community, it takes supporting people, having things like mentorship, buddy systems, different place for people to ask questions, which is number 3. So I already went to that one. So I'll go out of order. So facilitate a space for asking questions. This is really valuable, especially in a space like a government where there is governance structures and hierarchy. If people don't feel comfortable asking questions and getting pragmatic and helpful answers, it's going to be really difficult for teams across the government to implement accessibly. I'll jump up to the top one now, make a supported accessibility forum. So I said forum because the other word for that is community, and I already said community. But basically, pardon me, have somewhere for people to meet and discuss. Offer ways to discuss and also disagree as well. Accessibility, the legal side of it, has some fairly like opaque rules on how to do accessibility. So there often will be disagreement. And depending on sort of, even when it comes to user research, if there's multiple studies or research that's been done, has been done with different groups, you might get different answers. So have a place where people can come and disagree and sort of build into sort of a, well, the last part, build a culture of collaboration from that, come together and sort of, figure it out together. And I've fully lost, I might need technical help.
Oh, yeah.
What happened?
I think you, yeah, you're good now.
Oh, thank you. All right. So I have an example for this one as well, specifically on building a culture of collaboration. So this doesn't really show much on the screen. I'll explain the image I have here, though. It's sort of a big, wide rectangle, and it has the word hello in it. And the rectangle has a black outline surrounded by a yellow outline. And then at the bottom, it says you have 194 characters remaining. So this is actually one of the components in our design system. It's called the character count component. And what it does is count the number of characters inside a text area for things like a form online. So we noticed within sort of the last year that there was an issue with sort of how screen readers, so tools that people use in order to sort of read out what's on the screen to them. And they were reading out this character count of like, you have 199 characters, you have 198 way too often. And it was sort of interrupting itself and breaking. So we investigated this. We found a potential solution. We worked as a team to build the solution. We verified it. And then we could have just stopped there. where we were like, hey, we fixed it on ours. Great, we're done. We didn't stop there though. The next step that we had when it comes to a culture of collaboration was we reached out to the US government actually for their their design system. And we sort of pinged them and we nudged them. We were like, hey, we think this would help you as well. We found a way to make it so that this particular component wouldn't be so verbose and interrupting for people using screen readers. Do you want to adopt it? And they took a look and they said yes. And now instead of helping just the people on the island of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, that space, it's also helping people in the US. So yeah, culture of collaboration can be very powerful in the accessibility space. All right, next broad statement is accessibility takes advocacy. So it's not just good enough to do accessibility. Well, that is good. But in order to do it on the scale of a government, you also need advocacy. You need champions. You need to sort of support it across the government. So part of what this means for individuals that are focusing on accessibility, or even individuals that have a passing understanding of accessibility and want to promote it, it's asking the basic questions. When there's something that looks like it may not be accessible, asking, hey, is this accessible? When you're in a space where you're not sure if the thing you're working on is accessible, it's people asking, do we have funding to make this accessible? Do we have time? And hoping that the answer is yes. And if the answer is no, asking why the answer is no, and why we're looking at sort of making a service or an application that doesn't work for 1 in 5 people. The other thing is supporting and boosting others' work. So building sort of that supportive community, even if not everyone's doing like a 100% perfect iteration of like everything accessible in their spaces, the work they are doing and the championing they are doing, support that and boost each other. It is sort of a very big space. Get champions in leadership roles is the third one I have there. This is very important when it comes to things like that budgeting and getting approval for things. Having a champion that can sort of have everyone's backs and sort of point the organization in the direction that we should be going is very valuable. And the last one, which I'll have an example for, is push for more research when needed. So I think I'll do a slight demo for this one if I can. We have this component we're working on right now. We call it just the button, which is a terrible name because the name's changed a few times. Right now, though, we're calling it exit this page. It also used to be called hide this page. And I'll go to that. Okay, how do we do that? Can you reshare an incognito window?
You just have to.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. There it is. So I just wanted to show it sort of in a real page here because the one we're working on hasn't been released yet. But this is an example where we got sort of contributions from 3 or 4 different teams that say, hey, we have this feature we're working on. We're calling it hide this page. Basically, it's what other people might know as a quick exit button, but on sensitive pages where, or what we call in our team, spooky pages, pages that might have information or pieces to them that can be at risk in sort of sensitive environments. In this case, child maintenance payments, which is their version of, I think, not alimony. I don't know what it's called. Child support. Yes, that's exactly it. Thank you to people in the room. So you click it and it brings you to, generally the idea is to bring you to a place that is less suspicious of the page. So that's something we're working on. And as I move back now, the reason I'm talking about this is this was one where we got all the contributions from a bunch of groups. And I'll reshare now. Yeah. So yeah, we got the contributions from a bunch of different groups across government. And we had to basically decide which one do we go with. We had so many inputs, actually. It was great. There was all this collaboration happening, but we didn't actually know which one was the right implementation. So we went and we asked for funding, basically, to do research on this. We did 8 sessions of usability testing with people with various sort of access needs or people with disabilities. And then we did 6 sessions with people who had lived experience specifically with sort of domestic violence in the home as potential people who would have experience with these situations. So from that, we were able to realize that a lot of the work we were doing and had previously been done didn't cover everything that was needed for those situations. So now we're working on sort of a new prototype for that. But that just sort of goes to show that, yeah, it takes advocacy. And the advocacy in that case was asking for the funding to do this. Thankfully, it was a pretty wholehearted yes, but I know it's not that case in every case. So making that point of like, this is something that's important enough to the team that we want to take the extra time it's going to take to do the research and spend that money. Which brings me to the next one. It takes investment. And investment within accessibility within the government. I have 4 things. I think this one's pretty quick though. So providing equipment and an earmarked budget is sort of a way to go with that. So equipment is needed in order to test, in order to build things like this, and developers and teams need access to that. That's kind of baseline. Training team members and content creators is also something that takes investment, whether that's in-house training or external training, conferences, tutorial or courses, things like that. Hiring accessibility specialists. So that one, not just me, but just the idea of having sort of experts to turn to and people that can set the strategy is very important. And then dedicating time and capacity as well. It's not enough to just have equipment and team members and training and accessibility specialists. You also need to budget into roadmaps, time to do the actual work. So example for that, I won't talk too quickly or too much on it, but our team now is working on accessibility strategy. As far as we can tell, it's the first one that will be public within the government space. Asterisks on that, the first one in English, because I only know how to Google search in English. So that is where that research came from. But yeah, so a few private sector ones like the IBM Carbon design system do have an accessibility strategy, but this is sort of the first one within government. And we're sharing it publicly so that other governments can also learn from it and sort of build their own to help, yeah, really solidify the direction. And our main purpose for doing this, it's not just fun work because I like making policies. I also do like that. But the main purpose is to outline the work that we need to do and the principles that drive that work. All right, my last point now is hire people with disabilities. There is sort of a saying or a mantra within, not a mantra, a fundamental like thing within the accessibility spaces and within disability communities known as nothing about us without us. So it's important to, if it's going to be a space of accessibility, if we're talking about disabled people, we can't do that without having those people in sort of the mix and helping to make those decisions. So that means working to meet people's access needs in inside government. So in like when you hire people, make sure that their access needs are met and that they're actually able to use the tools, provide them with extra tools or new tools if they need in order to do their jobs. Don't just hire people to do accessibility roles or testing. Your organization, especially for a government, should be able to hire disabled people in any role, basically. And it's not just the roles where accessibility is involved, where they are valuable and their contributions are valuable. And I'll end with, this is a whole other area of improvement that I'm not going to touch any further on. It delves a little bit into HR, and I was specifically talking about like web accessibility, so I will leave it at that and go to questions.